BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Overall, I'd say that I have a very short attention span when it comes to reading. I probably only read continuously for 5 to 10 minutes at a time, and I mentioned in a previous upload that's why I became a big fan of audiobooks and such. But one of the advantages of having a short attention span with reading is you often end up starting 7 or 8 books at once, and I'm not exaggerating, and you're kind of just reading them all at the same time. Sometimes in a day, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, if you have downtime, even on a 30-minute break or something like that, you can go through some pieces of information from 3 different books. Nonfiction is very practical for that. So that's kind of what happened yesterday. We were talking all about The Politics of Love, A Politics of Love, we should say, by Marianne Williamson, and one of the things that I did later in the evening was I pulled up another book that I had been reading. It's an audiobook, actually, that we talked about on this channel, The True History of Religion, that had been put out by Marvelous Work and Wonder. And they got into a few things. Both of these books, just by coincidence, other than the fact that this is a subject that I get into from time to time. The Revolution of Consciousness. What is this all about? Now, I know we have a few regular listeners to this program, even though this is a very small show. So maybe you've heard this before, but I was at a bar once, and this one guy was going on and on about politics and all the problems in the world, and I was just like, well, what do we do about it? What does anybody do about it? And what he said was, a revolution of consciousness is more valuable than a revolution of military force. When you're getting people to start thinking in a new way, that has so much more value than a revolution that is fought with wars and bloodshed. And the example that he cited was Gandhi in India. But of course, as we know, Gandhi is a very controversial figure, and Richard Grenier is the Gandhi that nobody knows. That is also something that we should bear in mind. But at the same time, Gandhi did contribute certain things to the peace-building process. First and foremost, being an influence on Martin Luther King Jr., who accepted the message of nonviolence, and I believe you know that story. So when we want to look at the revolution of consciousness, it is not only about thinking in a new way, because when a lot of people, like, say, even Marianne Williamson, who we cited with A Politics of Love, as well as countless other books that she has put out, and lectures and speeches, it's also about kind of an existential spiritual presence about what consciousness is and what it means to us. And they're even sort of saying, some people predict, and by some people, I mean the memes on Facebook, and perhaps the Gaia Network, that we are going to undergo something that is going to be rather similar to an enlightenment, but perhaps more on the lines of just being aware of a certain sense of love in the universe, and that we're going to have some sort of massive change in human thought within the next 30 years. I think we're on track for something like that, but of course we don't necessarily know the future just yet. So I was reading that book, The True History of Religion, that we talked about once on this channel before, and what they were saying is something that was rather similar to what Marianne Williamson put out, but they're just sort of nutshell breakdown, just going from chapter 1 of their book. The humans on Earth will never overthrow the oligarchs if we keep using the same political system. We will never have any change if we're still using the same framework, the same system by which we have that allows oligarchy to propagate. And on this channel, we've said very clearly that all these people online talking about the New World Order and stuff, what the New World Order really is something like the mechanism which allows oligarchy to propagate within a civilization. And it's not simply that I think that, because this book, The True History of Religion, that was put out by Marvelous Work and Wonder, they said the exact same thing. That's why I still listen to their crap, even though they get really weird and wacky sometimes. I like weird and wacky stuff, who doesn't? But they actually, from time to time, they actually have a line or two that really kind of resonates with you. And that's what they're talking about. But they said virtually the same thing. They're like, the people are meaningless. And this is the biggest criticism I ever had of Alex Jones, is he tries to get you mad at the people. He tries to get you mad at the globalists, and they'll bring up the names like the Rockefellers and Rothschild. But really, it's like, the people are meaningless. If these oligarchs disappear, they would just be replaced by other oligarchs. So, I mean, if you look at the famous names in our country about who the richest people are, 100 years ago, nobody was talking about Bezos and Buffett and Gates. And, like, the oligarchs can change. And, I mean, those are financial oligarchs, to be very precise, but oligarchs can change, and the people are not what we should be focusing on. We should be looking at the mechanism by how this functions in society. And first and foremost, if you're going to talk about getting people to think in a new way, definitely it would be to recognize the problems of oligarchy, the mechanism that allows oligarchy to propagate, and just to sort of look at how the ordinary person is getting screwed over. Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate, wrote a book called The War on Normal People. And I cite that title all the time, The War on Normal People. Sometimes I call it The War Against Normal People, not talking about his book. But just when you notice that, like when we're watching this thing during the Thanksgiving weekend and the family's together, so we wanted to watch something really benign. So we saw this thing on Aerial America about California. And you're talking about how miners were working in 130-degree heat for $4 a day, and they were just so passionate to get that $4. And I'm fully aware that that was worth a lot more money at the time than it is now, but it's still like people are going through grueling conditions just so that they can pay for food for their families and pay for a structure to live in, while other people are not only becoming extremely wealthy. I'm not opposed to wealth. Most people in America aren't opposed to wealth. It's this system that allows oligarchy to propagate. Most people are just ripping off the country to no end, bleeding the country dry. And by most people in the oligarchical circle, I should be very precise about. It's not about being wealthy. That's not the problem. Some people are going to be rich. No one seems to have too much of a problem unless your last name is Sanders. But it's like, it's power, money, and the ability to manipulate the system. A strong private sector can move the public sector to its advantage. And the thing that we need to be very much aware of is that that's only happening from a small select group of people. Just because somebody has money, it doesn't mean they can move the public sector to their advantage. But in short, certain people in this very small group that we call the oligarchs can manipulate the political system. And I think, though, when we're going to be talking about the revolution of consciousness, on the non-spiritual level, over the next 10 to 20 years, I think more people are going to be aware of that. But everybody who's talking about consciousness brings in also a spiritual element. And Marianne Williamson gets into this a little bit in A Politics of Love, when she mentions that it's just more about recognizing that what is greatly missing from our political system is the love of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And until we get leaders who are honestly believing that and put that into practice, we will never be able to actually have prosperity in America. So that's another thing that I think that is very important for us to talk about with our political system, is the political system that we have in the United States of America is against the people. It is against the people, because it's like our leaders are not genuinely promoting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No, they're promoting, all right, how do we deceive the people into getting more power and more control for the oligarchs? And it's just the same old system that's been going on for perhaps thousands of years, if we go back to ancient Rome, or perhaps some of the other empires before that. So in short, I'm not opposed to leaders. I mean, you got some people like Stefan Molyneux out there saying, no, we don't need rulers. We need rules, but no rulers. Just sort of talking about forming some sort of anarcho-capitalist state. I mean, we can talk about libertarians, and we will on the mini-upload today, and some of the things that libertarians have talked about. There are some libertarians out there who have said some very good things and very good critiques of our political system, especially when you're going to deal with non-interventionist foreign policy, and for the sole reason that they want to bring peace to the world. And I give so much credit to somebody, even like Ron Paul, as well as the people who work with him, Daniel McAdams and Chris Rossini and Jeff Deist, because they're talking about bringing peace to the world. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing. And this is the stuff, though, that we might be experiencing more in the coming years. That there will be this connection between the concept of political leadership and bringing people toward peace, because it is the moral thing to do, and that you get leaders who actually are striving toward that vision with a sense of honesty. Now that is definitely something to do with the revolution of consciousness. But one of the things, though, that people are talking about when it comes to the Enlightenment is, this is a little bit controversial, so you're going to have to bear with me. I'm not even sure what to make of it myself. But when they talk about the Age of Enlightenment that happened in France, I don't even know how much I can accept this, but this is the stuff that you get when you're watching just hours of YouTube late at night a couple years ago, and you're just like, whoa, crazy. So, supposedly, the Age of Enlightenment was supposed to be about metaphysics and divine love, but it got hijacked by an individual named Abate Antonio Conti, who was working for the oligarchs of Venice at the time, and he steered the course of the Enlightenment to be more about what it is known today for, mostly things about secular thinking, right? As well as just politics that are going to be kind of benefiting the people, voluntarism. Voltaire gets his name from the word volontaire and such. Now, I'm not necessarily 100% clear on stuff like that, but apparently one of the big motivations of Abate Antonio Conti was to discredit Gottfried Leibniz, because Leibniz was all about, as we said, divine love and metaphysics, and this is the best of all possible worlds, and for every solution there is a problem, and for every problem there is a solution. This is the best of all possible worlds just means is, no matter how terrible things are, no matter what problem you are facing, there is a way to make it better. If the problem exists, then the solution must exist too. And supposedly, I say that word supposedly a lot, like it's almost becoming like a broken record. I'm allegedly, possibly, this is an interpretation, mind you. It is something that has been argued. It's like, what you would say is that Leibniz could have genuinely altered the course of human thinking, whereas somebody like Voltaire did not. And again, I'm not a complete expert on it, but if you sort of just comprehend that thing for a second, what they really mean is, if there is a famine, there is a way to get people food. If there is poverty, there is a way to make people less poor. If there are people who need things, there is a way to get them what they need. Helping the sick and helping the poor, all of these things can be achieved. Leibniz also gets into a few things about the first and foremost foundation of economics should begin with the idea. And it's all about using ideas to bring about prosperity to the planet Earth. And what I can say, though, is from reading up on the subject, it definitely seems like Conti and Leibniz had a lot of interactions. Antonio Conti was the person who was in charge of the correspondence between Gottfried Leibniz and Isaac Newton, because they both claimed that they discovered calculus, and apparently Conti was in charge of their correspondence, and supposedly, said that word again, sorry, just put a little dime in the jar or something every time I say the word supposedly. Allegedly, possibly, supposedly, Leibniz was the original founder of calculus, and even I was asking my Amazon Alexa about it now. I asked Alexa who discovered and invented and created calculus, whatever word you'd like to use, and Alexa was saying that calculus was developed by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, so that is something that is kind of a little more established now. But that's getting away from the sort of revolution of consciousness stuff, and that's talking about math, which I doubt anyone would really want to explore. The whole point is, people are saying a lot of different things about the Age of Enlightenment, and I think it is somewhat of a controversial statement to say that the Age of Enlightenment was about divine love and metaphysics, and then it was hijacked by secularists because it was a more beneficial agenda to the oligarchs of Venice. But at the same time, I always think about it, though, when you're sort of looking at what could actually be beneficial to the people, and there definitely are oligarchs. I don't dispute that, and I don't think anyone should dispute that. A small group of people that can have a concentration of power, absolutely something like that is real. I mean, it's going to be a statistical, existential piece of existence. It's just like, it's going to happen. If you have millions of people, small groups are going to form, and some of them are going to be more powerful than others. Over thousands of years, these small groups can exert their influence over the larger groups and bring them under control. It's like, this is something that is most likely going to happen. But now with advancements in technology and just advancements in the ability to share information and share ideas, we as the people can become somewhat more aware of it. And these are things that you also learn from Leibniz, where it's just all about optimism, because the solution does exist. Even if you think that it's impossible to shatter the political system, well, if you have this problem, then the solution exists too. We just have to find it. That's why I never really accept certain draconian measures that people are trying to put in place, just like, this is the way it has to be. It's somewhat cynical and it's somewhat pessimistic, whereas the optimistic solution does exist. We might just have to work a little for it. Okay, so when we're also getting into the revolution of consciousness, some of the things that people are also talking about in this book, The True History of Religion, which, as I said, it's by Marvelous Work and a Wonder, and it's available on their channel, but they're now calling themselves the New Illuminati. And one of the things that Marvelous Work and a Wonder has done in the past that I've had a problem with is they don't flat out tell you what they believe. They always hold something back, and they say that they're going to show you the truth in their next book, but they never really give you the whole truth. But they finally shared some things in this book, The True History of Religion, where they're saying that ourselves here on Earth are actually the kind of lesser forms of our true self. It's almost like if you were to have a planet in another solar system where there is this true, more perfect, more brilliant and magnificent version of yourself, almost like your ideal self is living in another solar system, and you're here on Earth, and when you die, you will learn about the connection between the ideal self that you have and the person that is here on Earth. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I'll let you know once I'm dead, I suppose. It's very easy to talk about what's going to happen after death, because very few people will be able to dispute that with you. But there are going to be people who are going to be talking about metaphysics and just even other different possible states of reality, and they're all going to lump it together under this quote-unquote revolution of consciousness. Not to mention, we do have perhaps some less toned down, forgive me for using the words wacky and woo-woo, but that's the way I would describe some of these real Illuminati, Marvelous Work and a Wonder guys. But you also have people like Amit Goswami, who he did an interview with Joe Rogan that I think exposed him to a lot of people. He was a guest on that program. But he also did the films What the Bleep Do We Know? He's a panelist in that one. That wasn't his own creation, but he was also heavily involved with something called The Quantum Activist, which was all about him, as opposed to What the Bleep Do We Know is about many different people. I'll always remember one of the lines from that film. It only takes one thought for a man to have an erection. Thoughts are powerful. And that is something that people really do get into with the revolution of consciousness. They get into this thing about how your thoughts are very strong, your thoughts are very powerful, the secret, thoughts emit frequencies and they attract certain behaviors to you. But with the quantum activist, it actually goes a little bit further and tries to pull this all into a scientific setup. And I always want to hear these things from people who want to kind of bridge the different gaps between our different academic disciplines. Like as we said with Marianne Williamson on The Politics of Love, that's all about bridging the gap between politics and spiritual teaching. With something like the quantum activist, it was more about trying to bridge the gap between something such as religion and science, and saying that their consciousness is the ground of all being. And it relates to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, stating something to the effect of our subatomic particles in their most, again, the smallest states, even when you're dealing with things like photons, or you're dealing with things like perhaps even protons, neutrons, and electrons. But they're talking about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says that momentum and location are not determined. So if these things are just always just moving, then they only exist in the state of possibility, where momentum and location are undetermined. In short, everything in existence, all of these things that we have are composed of subatomic particles, and they're all just possibilities. And this massive conglomerate of all the possibilities in the universe is something that Amit Goswami calls source consciousness. And Richard Dawkins was very critical of this stuff, because Richard Dawkins, of course, the evolutionary biologist who is very much in favor of secular thinking, and he's participated in a lot of atheist versus Christian debates, he said very clearly that they don't know if they're talking about quantum theory or consciousness, and they can't get it straight. But in response, I would say that they were really trying to say that quantum theory and consciousness are one and the same. The stuff that Amit Goswami puts out, though, has received a lot of very critical backlash from some of the other scientists in the world, because they believe that it's a simple just misinterpretation of what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is, or that it's taking too many creative liberties with science, and that not all scientists are in consensus about everything that he's saying. But we will encounter more of these things where people are just trying to say that there is a certain religious truth in what science is trying to put out, and science has a certain truth in what religion is putting out, that there are these sort of things. And Reza Aslan talks about this as well, when he says that a religion is a language that you use not to talk to other people, but the language that you use to talk to the universe and the cosmos. And over time, we are going to be kind of seeing this language, this religious language, shift from stories in the past to move to something such as science. Particularly physics will be one of the ways that we connect with the universe and the cosmos, but there will be a certain religious connection to it all the same, because Albert Einstein even talked about this with cosmic spiritualism way before any of these people were peddling things about consciousness. So I know that this stuff, it really isn't the... I know that I did not put out the most elegant presentation of all of that, but I think the only sort of culminating factor that we can say about all these things is it's like there are many different interpretations of every discipline, whether it is history, science, religion, sociology. There are going to be a lot of people that are saying different things. But it doesn't seem like everybody is completely wrong about them. And what I really find is, when you're going through an entire book, like I said, you might think that some things are really crazy. There's a perfect version of yourself living on a planet in another parallel universe. That might sound a little far out. But just sort of saying that we humans need to be aware of the concept of oligarchy, that doesn't sound so crazy to me. And I think that we can really strive toward a lot of new things in life. And over the years, over the next couple years, the next decade even, there are going to be a lot more discussions about consciousness and what it means to certain people. I mean, some people would just simply say that consciousness is the experience of existence. I mean, that could be a challenge question to you. What do you think consciousness is? How would you define consciousness? And then you can get involved with some of the Jordan Peterson stuff. Well, that depends on what your definition of consciousness is. And you can notice that some people are altering the words. And you can kind of have your own personal definition for something, sure. But, well, then what is it? Talk about it. So what I would really say is that when people are expressing controversial opinions, I don't like to ignore them. If anything, it's good entertainment. And it's good to hear some things that are far out sometimes. I was even telling somebody once, I like listening to just like the absolute wackiest forms of political ideologies and spiritual thinking. I just love hearing it because, it's something different that I haven't heard before. Who would want to hear the same old all the time? The same thing every day? No, we want to hear something different. And you also want to hear about how people think in a different way. Getting more in touch with the revolution of consciousness. But I definitely think, though, there is a certain value in having these conversations about metaphysics, about having conversations about love. Does love exist in a way that is much greater than what we had thought of in the past? And I think this is where we're going to have to leave it now. But what I would say is, I know this upload was really messy. This definitely did not sound like anything spoken out loud that it did in my head. So please, sorry about all the jumbling and the rambling and the messed up sentences and the word supposedly all the time. But I would love to hear what you guys would have to say anything about what do you think the revolution of consciousness is. And we tried to cover a few different things about it and what it would mean to different people. But anyway, that's where we're going to have to leave it. And good talking to you. Let's talk more in the comments section. Until next time.